47 years after a 6-year-old vanished on his way to a school bus, the Supreme Court finally closed the case. A 1979 disappearance, a face on milk cartons that built a national system, a confession 33 years later, 2 trials, and a 6-3 ruling. The legal case is over, and the one question his parents asked for 4 decades still has no answer because his body has never been found. On the morning of May 25, 1979, 6-year-old Etan Patz stood inside his family's SoHo loft at 113 Prince Street preparing for a small milestone. After weeks of discussion, his parents, Julie and Stanley Patz, gave him permission to walk the 2 blocks to his school bus stop alone for the very first time. It was a brief, ordinary route east toward the corner of Prince Street and West Broadway. He wore a blue corduroy jacket, a black pilot cap, and carried $1 for a soda. He stepped onto the Manhattan sidewalk at approximately 8 o'clock, leaving the safety of his home to take his first steps toward independence. Etan never boarded the school bus. By afternoon, when he failed to return home, Julie Patz contacted the school and learned he had never arrived. The realization of his absence immediately shifted from a parent's quiet panic to a citywide emergency. Within hours, the New York City Police Department initiated a massive search, canvassing neighborhoods, knocking on doors, and printing thousands of black and white posters. Volunteers swept through SoHo's industrial alleys, basements, and rooftops, while detectives began an investigation that would soon draw the eyes of the entire country. Julie and Stanley Patz found their private living room transformed into a public headquarters, flooded with journalists, officers, and a desperate hope for answers. Despite the unprecedented mobilization of local and federal resources, the streets of Lower Manhattan yielded no physical trace of the boy. Etan's body was never recovered, leaving an empty space where a routine walk should have ended. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan designated May 25th, the anniversary of Etan's disappearance, as the first National Missing Children's Day, establishing an annual day of remembrance and vigilance. By the mid-1980s, the effort to find missing children reached millions of American homes through a new medium. Following a pilot program in Iowa, dairy companies began printing photos of missing children on the sides of milk cartons. In 1985, Etan's face appeared on these cartons across the country, making his image one of the most recognizable symbols of a growing national crisis. This mass visibility drove a shift toward institutional organization, transitioning from local, fragmented searches to a coordinated nationwide network of information sharing. Public awareness turned into legislative action. The outcry surrounding Etan's case, alongside other high-profile abductions, drove the passage of the Missing Children's Assistance Act of 1984 and the establishment of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. These initiatives built the early foundations of centralized databases, including the first national missing child hotline and rapid alert networks that eventually evolved into modern systems like the Amber Alert. The search for one boy permanently reshaped the national child protection system, even if it did not build every program alone. Throughout this systemic evolution, Julie and Stanley Patz remained the human connection to the policy changes, transforming their private grief into a lifetime of advocacy. Their efforts helped ensure that the vulnerabilities exposed on a Manhattan street in 1979 led to a permanent protective shield for future generations. 33 years passed without a single charged suspect in the disappearance of Etan Patz. The silence broke in May 2012 when police arrested Pedro Hernandez, a former stock clerk who had worked at a bodega near the school bus stop in 1979. During hours of police questioning, Hernandez confessed to the abduction and murder. The admission turned a decades-old cold case into an active criminal prosecution, but it did not provide a simple resolution. Defense attorneys immediately questioned the validity of the statement, pointing to Hernandez's low IQ and documented history of psychiatric illness. They argued the interrogation techniques exploited these vulnerabilities before detectives administered Miranda warnings. Prosecutors, however, maintained the confession was voluntary and legally sound. Before a single piece of evidence reached a jury, the case became a battleground over the boundaries of police interrogation, shifting the focus from a national search to a complex legal dispute over the admissibility of a confession. The legal proceedings against Pedro Hernandez began in Manhattan Criminal Court on January 12, 2015. After 3 weeks of testimony and days of deliberation, the first trial ended in a hung jury. Under New York law, a criminal conviction requires all 12 jurors to agree. Because they could not reach a unanimous decision, the judge declared a mistrial. This outcome was not an acquittal, which would have cleared Hernandez of the charges. Instead, the state simply had to decide whether to present its case again. In March 2017, prosecutors initiated a retrial, presenting the evidence to an entirely new jury. This second proceeding concluded with a definitive verdict. The new jury found Hernandez guilty of kidnapping and felony murder, resulting in a sentence of 25 years to life. Pedro Hernandez's 2012 confession initiated 14 years of appellate litigation. An appeal is not a retrial. It is not an investigation into Etan Patz's final hours, nor is it evidence of innocence. Instead, appellate review is an examination of alleged legal or procedural error, rather than a fresh hearing of all the evidence. The defense focused their challenges on admissibility, which dictates whether a judge permits evidence to be presented to a jury. They argued that the initial hours of interrogation without a Miranda warning should have barred the subsequent confessions. This led to disputes over jury instructions, the legal guidance given to jurors about evaluating the case. Specifically, the defense contended that the trial court failed to instruct the jury correctly on how to weigh a confession obtained after an unwarned interrogation. This institutional battle moved through state and federal courts, focusing entirely on procedure rather than factual guilt. In 2025, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the conviction, finding the trial judge's instructions legally flawed. Seeking to restore the 2017 verdict, prosecutors appealed to the United States Supreme Court, passing the final unresolved questions to the nation's highest judicial authority. On June 22, 2026, the Supreme Court issued a 6-3 decision reinstating Pedro Hernandez's conviction. The court held that the Federal Appeals Court had overstepped the limits of its review when it threw out the verdict, ruling that the state court's handling of the confession was proper. By denying a new trial, the decision brought 47 years of legal history to a permanent close. Hernandez remains incarcerated at Attica Correctional Facility, serving his sentence of 25 years to life. For the criminal justice system, the file is finished. Yet for Julie and Stanley Patz, legal finality does not bring personal resolution. Etan's remains have never been found, leaving his family with no grave to visit and no physical site for their grief. What endures instead is the national child protection infrastructure built in his memory. The alert systems, the centralized databases, and the annual observance of National Missing Children's Day on May 25th remain the lasting legacy of a single walk in 1979. One family's private loss became a permanent shield for millions of American children. Subscribe to our channel to follow more landmark American cases. Today, the legal ledger is permanently closed, yet the central absence remains. For the Patz family, justice is a procedural reality, not a physical recovery. In the end, the system can provide finality, but it cannot bring a child home.